The drive to my father's house takes 22 minutes on a good night. I know, because I have made it so many times that my hands find the turns before my eyes do. That particular Friday in March, I made it in 19. I was running early, which was unusual for me, and I remember thinking that was a good sign. I had spent the previous hour wrapping a birthday gift, a first edition copy of a book my father had mentioned exactly once, 8 months earlier, at Sunday dinner. I had written it down in my phone the moment he said it. That is the kind of daughter I was. The text arrived while I was stopped at the light on Mercer and Fifth. My brother's name at the top of the screen. The message below it short enough to read without unlocking. Dad said to tell you tonight got moved. Don't make the trip. He'll call you tomorrow. I read it twice. Then I looked at the gift sitting in the passenger seat, wrapped in the brown paper my father preferred, with a card I had spent 40 minutes writing tucked under the ribbon. I texted back a single word. Okay. Then I kept driving. I want to be honest about why. It was not defiance, not exactly. It was something closer to a feeling I had learned to recognize over the years, the particular hollow sensation of being managed. My brother Marcus had been delivering messages on my father's behalf since we were teenagers. He was good at it. He had a way of softening the edges just enough that you couldn't quite locate the sharpness until later, when you were alone and the evening had already closed around you. I parked 2 blocks from the house. I told myself I only wanted to see if the lights were on. Every light in the house was on. I walked to the end of the block and stood in the shadow of a large oak that has been there since I was a child. Through the front window I could see movement, the warm yellow interior of the living room, the shape of people gathered. I could hear, faintly, the specific quality of noise that belongs to a party, not a conversation, not a family dinner, but a celebration. Multiple voices layered over music. I stood there long enough to see my brother carry a cake through the archway between the kitchen and the living room, long enough to hear the singing start. It was my father's 62nd birthday. The party had not been moved. I had been uninvited. My name is Claire. I was 31 years old that March, and I am the founder of a small but genuinely profitable residential architecture and interior design firm that I built from nothing over 7 years. I say this not to establish importance, but to establish context, because what I am about to tell you cannot be understood without understanding what I had built and what had been done to it while I was looking the other way. I drove home. I put the gift on my kitchen counter. I did not cry, which surprised me, because I am not someone who generally manages her feelings efficiently. What I felt instead was a kind of clarity that arrives sometimes, when something you have been half suspecting for a long time finally takes a definite shape. I poured a glass of water, sat down at my kitchen table, and waited to understand what I was actually feeling. My phone rang 40 minutes later. It was my best friend Danny, who has known me since the 2nd year of college and who has a talent for calling at the precise moment I need someone to answer. I told her what had happened. I told her about the text, the drive, the oak tree, the cake. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, that there was something she had been wanting to tell me for about 3 weeks, and had not known how to bring up. Danny worked in commercial real estate. Not in a large capacity, she managed leasing for a mid-sized portfolio of mixed-use properties in the metro area. 2 months earlier, she had been reviewing a new sublease application for a co-working space in the Riverside district, and had recognized the name of the guarantor on the primary lease. It was my firm. My full legal business name, exactly as it appeared on my state registration. She had thought it was a coincidence, or an error, or something I had arranged and not mentioned. She had been waiting for the right moment to ask. I told her I had not arranged anything in the Riverside district. I told her I had not signed any lease. I told her to send me everything she had. I did not sleep that night. By morning I had the sublease application, the primary lease, and a set of correspondence that had been sent from an email address I recognized immediately. The domain was mine. The firm's domain. The username was not one I had created. Someone had made an email address that looked like it belonged to my office and used it to execute a lease on commercial space, listing my firm as the responsible party and had been subleasing individual desks and private offices to freelancers and small contractors for, as best I could determine from the payment records Danny sent over, approximately 14 months. The authorized signature on the primary lease was mine. It was not my signature. I sat with that for a long time. My firm had a small administrative infrastructure, a project manager, a part-time bookkeeper, and for the first 18 months of the firm's growth, a person who had helped me manage vendor relationships, contractor scheduling, and operational logistics. I had trusted him with more access than I should have, because he was my brother, and because trust is sometimes a thing you extend before you have been taught the specific shape of its limits. Marcus had worked for me for 14 months. He had left by mutual agreement about 8 months before that Friday in March. I had kept the parting amicable. I had given him 3 months of transitional pay. I had not asked too many questions about certain invoices that had seemed inconsistent because he was my brother and because some part of me had already decided that the amount was not worth the damage. I understand now that he understood this about me, that he had made a calculation based on my particular tolerance for avoidance, and that the Riverside lease was made under the same assumption, that I would not look, or that if I looked, I would not want to find anything badly enough to actually pursue it. The sublease revenue over 14 months was not a small amount. Taken together with the vendor payment discrepancies from his time at the firm, which I spent the following 4 days reconstructing from bank records, my bookkeeper's files, and the operational logs from our project management software, the picture was organized and coherent and genuinely sickening in its patience. He had not been reckless, he had been methodical. Small amounts through enough channels that each individual transaction could be attributed to ordinary error. I called my attorney on a Monday morning. Her name is Priya, and she has handled the firm's contracts since the beginning. I walked her through everything I had assembled in the order I had assembled it, and she did not interrupt once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said that what I had described constituted wire fraud, forgery, and breach of fiduciary duty, and that she wanted me to send her every document I had before I spoke to anyone else. I asked her specifically not to contact my family. She agreed. I want to tell you about the 10 days that followed, because they are the part of this story that is hardest to explain simply. I went to work every morning. I answered emails. I reviewed plans. I had a client meeting on a Wednesday afternoon about a kitchen renovation in the historic district, and I gave that meeting my full attention because the client deserved it, and because focusing on work I was proud of was the thing that kept me from collapsing inward. Priya was building the legal documentation. My bookkeeper, once I explained what we were looking for, turned out to have flagged several of the same vendor irregularities herself and had a folder she had kept, she told me, just in case. I did not tell my parents. I want to be clear about that. I knew what I knew, and I chose, for 10 days, to hold it quietly. Not because I was afraid. Because I was waiting to understand the full shape of what had been done before I decided how to respond to it. My father called me on day 4. He left a voicemail, warm and slightly distracted, mentioning that the birthday dinner had been rescheduled and that he hoped we could find a time that week. His voice sounded the way it always sounds, fond, slightly performative, the voice of someone who loves you in a general way, without having organized that love into any particular action. I called him back and listened to him tell me about the party. He described the food and the guests and the small speech Marcus had given. He did not mention that I had been excluded. He spoke about it as if it were something that had happened to both of us, some unfortunate scheduling conflict, rather than a deliberate decision. I listened to all of it. I told him I was glad he'd had a good evening. I told him I was looking forward to dinner. Priya called me on day 9 with the completed documentation package. Everything cross-referenced, everything time-stamped. The forged signature compared against the original by a forensic document examiner she had used before. She had also identified the LLC Marcus had registered, quietly, in a neighboring county, through which the sublease revenue had been routed, before landing in an account connected to his personal expenses, and, notably, to a significant debt he had accumulated with a private creditor whose patience, from what Priya had found, was running out. There it was, the shape of it, finally complete. He had needed money. He had looked at what I had built and decided, as my parents apparently had decided on that Friday in March, that whatever I had was available to him. The dinner my father had rescheduled was a Saturday. My mother called Thursday to confirm I was coming. She asked me to bring the fennel salad I make, the one with the toasted almonds, because my father liked it. I said I would. I spent Friday evening making the salad and thinking about what it means to be the person in a family who brings the fennel salad and is left standing under an oak tree in the dark. I arrived at the house at 6:30. My mother met me at the door, and the warmth in her face was genuine in the way it always is. My mother has never been a cold person, which is one of the reasons what came later was so difficult to hold. Marcus was already there, standing in the kitchen with a beer, and he smiled at me with the full and easy smile of someone who has not spent the last 10 days understanding the specific mechanism of what he built. Dinner was normal. My father talked about a documentary he had watched. My mother asked about a project I was working on. Marcus made a joke about a neighbor and everyone laughed. I ate the fennel salad. I watched my family move through the familiar architecture of a family dinner. The small gestures, the shared references, the particular comfort of people who have known each other long enough to stop explaining themselves. And I held what I knew very quietly in the center of my chest and let the meal continue. After dessert, my father said he wanted to talk business. He used that phrase the way people do when they have rehearsed saying it casually. He mentioned that Marcus had been exploring some opportunities in commercial real estate and wondered if there was any way the firm's resources might be brought to bear in a partnership capacity. He used the phrase partnership capacity. I looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his coffee. I asked my father, very gently, which commercial real estate opportunities he meant specifically. My father looked at Marcus. Marcus said there was a co-working concept he had been developing. I asked whether it was the one in the Riverside district. Marcus went very still. I asked whether the lease for that space had been signed using my firm's name and my forged signature. My father started to say something about a misunderstanding. I asked him to let me finish. I had not brought the documents to the table. I did not need to. I told them, in order, what I had found and when I had found it. I told them about the forged signature and the fraudulent email domain and the vendor payment discrepancies from Marcus's time at the firm. I told them about the LLC in the neighboring county and the debt Marcus had been carrying and the 14 months of sublease revenue that had been routed through it. I told them the total. I watched my father set his fork down. I watched my mother's hands go still in her lap. I watched Marcus look at the wall behind my left shoulder with the focused concentration of someone trying to find a way out of an enclosed space. My mother was the first to speak. She said that family was supposed to take care of each other. She said it the way you say something you have prepared, a principle deployed as a shield. I told her I agreed and that I was curious which part of what Marcus had done she considered taking care of me. My father said that the amounts could be repaid, that it had been a difficult time for Marcus, that I had always had more than he did, and surely I understood how that kind of disparity affected a person. I told my father that I understood it very well and that understanding it did not make the forgery legal. Marcus said nothing. He looked at his coffee. Whatever he had planned to say in this conversation, and I believe he had planned something, some version of the partnership story that would have ended with me agreeing to absorb what had been taken. He had understood in the first 30 seconds that the conversation was not going to go that way. I stood up and put on my coat. My mother asked where I was going. I told her I was going home, that Priya would be in contact with Marcus directly, and that I hoped everyone had enjoyed the fennel salad because I had spent a meaningful amount of time on it and it had turned out well. I drove home. I called Priya from the car and told her the conversation had happened and she could proceed. I called Danny and told her everything and she made a sound that I recognized as the sound she makes when she has been holding her breath for a long time and finally stops. The legal process took 5 months. This is the part I want to be accurate about because I know people want to understand what accountability actually looks like when it is pursued properly, and it does not always look the way stories suggest it will. There was a civil complaint for fraud and forgery. There was a forensic accounting process. The LLC was dissolved, the sublease contracts were voided, and the co-working tenants were given proper direct leases, which several of them were relieved about because they had not known the original arrangement was improper. A formal repayment agreement was reached. structured over 3 years, with Priya's office holding the enforcement mechanism. The criminal referral was a conversation I had with Priya for a long time, and the decision I reached was mine alone, made with full information. I will not detail it here except to say that it was not made from softness. My parents and I did not speak for 4 months. My mother sent a card in June that said she missed me. I read it several times and put it in a drawer. My father did not reach out, which told me something useful about where the grief actually lived in the family, and where it did not. The thing about building something yourself. Really building it. The way you build a business from no clients and no reputation and a rented desk in someone else's office at 24 years old, is that you come to understand the weight of it. Every contract is a weight. Every client relationship, every hire, every year of showing up when it would have been easier not to. The thing weighs something real, and when you discover that someone has been quietly lifting pieces of it for over a year, using your name, your signature, the credibility you spent 7 years accumulating, the feeling is not simply anger. It is something more specific than anger. It is the feeling of having held something carefully for a long time and then discovering that someone else decided the careful holding was available to them. In September, I redesigned my home office. I moved my desk to face the window instead of the wall. It is a small thing, the kind of thing that would not register as significant to anyone observing it from outside. But I had been wanting to move that desk for 2 years and had never done it because the room belonged, in some ambient way, to the version of me who deferred. The version of me who read a message that said don't come and drove anyway and stood under a tree in the dark and then went home and wrapped the gift back up and put it on the counter. I work in a room that faces the window now. The light is better. I notice the seasons from my desk. Last October, I had 14 active projects and hired a second project manager, and the morning I extended that offer, I sat for a moment in my office and looked out at the street and felt something I can only describe as the particular satisfaction of a thing that belongs entirely to you. My brother and I are not in contact. This does not feel the way I thought it would feel, which is to say, it does not feel like loss in any clean sense. It feels more like the end of a long holding pattern, the release of something that had cost me more energy to maintain than I had ever properly accounted for. My parents and I are in a tentative and careful place. We have had 2 dinners since July. The dinners are shorter than they used to be and more honest, which is an exchange I have decided to accept. Danny came over the night the repayment agreement was finalized. We opened a bottle of wine and sat on my porch and watched the neighborhood do its ordinary Friday evening things. The dog walkers, the couple down the street who always fights and then stands on the porch laughing an hour later. The specific quality of ordinary life that continues moving through everything else. She asked me what the strangest part of all of it had been. I thought about it for a while. Then I said the strangest part was not the fraud, not the forgery, not even standing under the oak tree in the dark listening to my family celebrate without me. The strangest part was the 10 days of silence after I found out. The 10 days of going to work and making plans and attending client meetings and making a fennel salad, knowing what I knew, choosing to hold it until I understood its full shape. Because something had shifted in those 10 days that I did not have language for at the time. The version of me who would have driven to the front door that March night and knocked and made a scene. Who would have confronted Marcus at the first document I found. Who would have spent the energy on the reaction instead of the response. That version of me would have given all of them exactly what they expected. The instability. The emotion that could be reframed as irrationality. The open door for the narrative that had probably always been running quietly in the background. That Claire was difficult. That Claire overreacted. That whatever Marcus had done was at least understandable, given how hard it was to watch her succeed. I did not give them that narrative. I sat at my kitchen table, and I did the work and I waited, and then I walked into a birthday dinner and named everything out loud in a voice that was steady because I had spent 10 days deciding it would be steady. If you have ever built something with your own hands, a business, a reputation, a version of yourself that took years to assemble, you understand that the most dangerous threats to it are rarely the ones that arrive loudly. They are the ones that are patient. the ones that rely on your particular tolerance for looking away. The ones that have studied exactly how much you will absorb before you understand that absorbing it has been the whole strategy. I know what mine cost me to learn. I hope yours costs you less.